My name is Maryam Alemzadeh. I am an associate professor of history and politics of Iran here at Oxford. I am a faculty member at the Oxford School of Global and Area Studies, and I am a fellow at the Middle East Center at St. Anthony's College. My research in particular is on the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. So I am a sociologist of contemporary Iran, more generally speaking, and I'm interested in revolutions and state building, and very broadly speaking, how chaos rises out of order. So I am also interested in how the similar processes happen across the Middle East.
How did you come to study the Guards Corps?
That's a hard question. Growing up in Iran, I was always fascinated and puzzled by the level of informality permeating everything in state structures. And that is not a characteristic exclusive to Iran. A lot of other Middle Eastern countries and all countries around the world work informally to a certain extent. So I wanted to operationalize this, and I realized where best to study it than an institution that is expected to have utmost level of formality, and that is a military. So that's why I decided to interview Revolutionary Guards, like the first generation of them, and how out of the revolutionary chaos, they found a sort of informal order, and they institutionalized that informality within their structure, even after it became a massive bureaucracy through the years. It was a very interesting experience talking to first generation of Revolutionary Guards. Obviously, it's a highly politicized issue, and maybe the only reason I was able to talk to them and they agreed to talk to me was that I emphasized that I am not addressing the political side of the IRGC. I am mainly focusing on the history of their formation and the institutional, organizational side of things. But the very fact that I was sort of an outsider wanting to talk to them because it was quite clear that I'm not ideologically committed, and I'm only interested in the matter as a scholar, that opened some doors, surprisingly, because that's such a highly ideologized entity does not usually get a lot of requests for observation from non-ideological parties. And that gave me the experience of some experience in how to approach hard-to-reach populations for research, how to go about the bureaucratic hurdles, and so on and so forth. What I learned through this research was how to be flexible with interpretation and be flexible with what I receive as data when I'm doing qualitative interviews. You get training, you learn how to ask the right questions during your graduate studies, how to best interpret them, how to follow up so that you get the information that you need. But working with this highly politicized institution taught me to add an extra layer of skill for reading between the lines, asking indirect questions, seeking information by asking them to tell me stories and not their opinions necessarily, which would be along the lines of state ideology. So working with this particular group of interlocutants made me a better researcher at the same time. I have written op-eds and policy essays based on my research, even though my research is mainly on the historical origins of the IRGC. But what I've learned through this research is that the historical formation of the institution definitely has implications for its current standing. And if we better understand the underlying structure and how this organization works in practice, regardless of the policy that they explicitly declare the structure that they explicitly write down in their statutes and charters and everything. It is important to know, based on the historically formed practices and habits, how on an everyday basis it works. And that has policy implications for instance, what are the effective official formal sanctions on this organization or on individuals within this organization? How would they react to a conflict in the region that is like outside Iran? Like, how do they extraterritorially engage? How does it affect the way they are influencing heavily Iranian economy and society and policing? So there are a lot of policy relevant questions that you can ask, even though the research is not directly on those matters. So the book will be the story of the IRGC sort of from within, from an individual perspective, a micro level, what we like to call it, study of how it emerged out of the revolution, out of nothing, basically. This is a completely new institution. It's not like a transformation of a pre-existing organization. It starts grassroots, but then the state steps in, different factions in the state step in, and so a lot of the political power struggle in Iran is also reflected in the history of this organization. But it's first and foremost a story of how people came together to put together an organization and preserve it under rather hostile conditions at the beginning of the revolution. There's always a level of informality at work in any organization. That's a sort of a proven fact. Even in the most rigid and most organized structure, you still have some level of informality because it's just human people interacting with each other, and they diverge from the rules and regulations. In the case of Iran and the IRGC in particular, I think there was both a historical precedent of clerical communities preferring to run things informally, but there was also and this is the stronger, the more important part of it, it was an urge for preserving revolutionary flexibility that encouraged the preservation of this informality within the institution. So they basically equated the spontaneity of revolutionary times, the fact that it's justified to just get up and do something, a sort of a direct action attitude, they equated that with keeping things informal when revolutionary times have passed, and keeping that flexibility of action in the name of the revolution. There are various examples that manifest this trend. In the early years, there's tons of them. When the IRGC, for instance, got involved in the Iran-Iraq war, in the early years of the war, in 1980 to 82, for instance, there was a lot of spontaneous decision-making, defying orders, valorizing this type of behavior at the same time. It's not just that they were able to do it, it's that the organization endorsed and valorized this type of behavior as revolutionary at the same time. So yeah, a commander would lay down a plan of action, and in a lot of cases, the guards and the volunteers who worked with them would just defy and do something that was more proactive in their opinion and more necessary in their opinion. Traces of this behavior are still observable today. The government and the IRGC command still encourage and endorse it as revolutionary action. It doesn't happen as often because the structure has solidified to a great extent, but we still see, for instance, a few years ago in 2018, there was a downing of a US drone near Iranian border. There was a lot of debate around it, who ordered it, what happened, why did they do it, it could trigger a war, it was reckless behavior, and in the end, the official report was that it was a soldier firing at will. basically. That was the official response that the IRGC came with, and they endorsed it. It's not like that person, that officer, was reprimanded in any way. So examples like this still happen. I haven't talked to current staff and members of the IRGC. So what I'm observing is mostly from secondhand data, from news reports, or from what I can infer from the retrospective interviews that I've had. There is still a certain level of autonomy happening. They are still not encouraging like super rigid military discipline, and they haven't had to. After the Iran-Iraq war, there hasn't been another conventional war to test the structure of the current IRGC. The types of conflicts that they have engaged in are extraterritorial and are irregular, asymmetric warfare, which actually calls for some flexibility and informality, and it kind of pays off. That's a very good question, and I go back and forth myself in my assessment of whether this helps the stability of the regime or it hinders it because it's like inefficient to some degree at least. There's elements of both. So for instance, if you consider the IRGC's performance in the Iran-Iraq war, the informality actually helps with some of the operations. It's not the most efficient way, but in direct or indirect ways, it actually helps some of the early successful operations that the IRGC and the Iranian regular army conduct together. The informality is attractive for volunteers who are passionate to do something and want to go to the front to actually engage in some operation, whether it's even if it's risky. So it's actually helping them recruit and mobilize a lot of volunteers. When it comes to a point in the war when volunteers can go either to the army or to the IRGC, they mostly choose the IRGC to go and serve with, exactly because of these looser restraints. Directly, it gives them the spontaneity and like room for creativity that in the early years of the war proved, even if marginally useful in furthering Iran's campaign. But at the same time, as the war progressed, as the years passed, it was mainly preserved in the interest of the institution and the state, and not because of its efficiency. It actually started to be highly costly. There were an unacceptable number of Iranian casualties because of this, like informality and like a lack of professionalism that they had intentionally kept. But at that point, it was politically advantageous to preserve this organization as is, as a quote-unquote revolutionary one, as a political counterforce to technocrats and professionals. The routinization, so to speak, the professionalization of the IRGC was not something that the government was in full control of. A lot of it happened bottom up within the IRGC with the collective intentions and also the infightings that they had, especially after the first couple of years of its existence. So it was always a back and forth, like a dialectic move between the IRGC and the government to decide like what final shape it will take. The IRGC, after the second year of the war, like that early on, gained some political traction and could like push the government to comply to the commander's decisions to some extent. And it also depended on what was the tendency of the president in office at the time. What was the supreme leader's decision? How was that balance of power affecting the IRGC? So the simple answer to your question is it's a complex matter. Well, they have formalized to a degree. I'm not denying that it is a formal institution. Like, it started formalizing in the mid-80s and onward. I'm just emphasizing the fact that underneath the formal appearance, the facade, there's a lot of informality still lingering on. The informality has assisted them in repressing the recent uprisings in Iran, specifically the Women Life Freedom movement that was the largest that Iran had ever witnessed, and it became a real threat to the government. The informal elements, the plainclothes that the IRGC recruited to brutally and violently repress the uprising is something that the informality allowed them to do. The unaccountability and the lack of transparency, these all come with informality. At the same time, it might prove consequential for the regime at large as well. The IRGC started to become an economic giant in the Iranian sphere at the same time of being a military and security giant after the war, especially that is in 1990 and onward. In that, their interest has become tied with a vibrant middle and upper class in Iran. So it's not sustainable for them to sort of keep repressing the society and keep ruling by force, by mere force. So the fact that the IRGC, through this informality, has gained this much power in the Iranian politics and has such a massive economic interest in the sort of quiet and calm and everydayness of the society might prove critical for the future. It might be, we might see an internal metamorphosis of the IRGC into more of an entrepreneurial attitude than an ideological commitment to the supreme leader. And we have seen signs of that already happening.